So our next presenter is Nick DeNezzo, and he is truly interdisciplinary in terms of his background and experience. He has a background working as a mental health professional with foster youth before deciding to make a career switch. He's worked for years in marine mammal and seabird rescue and rehabilitation. And on top of that, he's an artist whose focus has been using art as a means for communicating marine science and conservation. So he's exactly the kind of student we like to have here in the program. Additionally, he is a skilled freediver and a master expert of camouflage when in a wetsuit on an ocean floor, which I think many of us who were at Catalina witnessed firsthand. So his talk today is entitled Taking the Bite Out of the Bite, an assessment of non-lethal shark bite mitigation strategies and potential applications in Southern California.
See, for just over a century, our culture surrounding sharks has been one of terror. In July of 1916, a series of shark bites rocked the shores of New Jersey over a span of only 12 days. 4 people were left dead and 1 seriously injured. Headlines rocketed around the country. The ensuing panic cost resort owners an estimated $6 million in modern-day money. Lifeguards were armed with shotguns, the Coast Guard was dispatched, and hundreds of sharks were slaughtered in what has been called the largest animal hunt in history. So ever since, the lens through which we view these animals has been one tinged with fear. We worry that shark bites will threaten our economies and our lives, and so politicians often feel the pressure to act, and their solutions have historically resulted in lethal methods. We'll put out nets and baited hooks, and we try to kill as many as we can to reduce their populations. Now, science has shown that this may not actually reduce our risk and results in remarkably high levels of non-shark bycatch. According to reports out of New South Wales and Australia, over 90% of the animals caught in their nets were not even the targeted shark species. And so there's been a growing movement towards non-lethal methods to reduce our risk of shark bites while also preventing the harmful environmental impacts of lethal culls. And so I became involved in this project earlier in the year when my advisor Alicia started working with a company based out of Australia that wanted to use drones for shark surveillance here in California. I did my best to help her as she built out a business model and pitched it out to investors. And while people seemed interested, it never quite took off. And so I wanted to backtrack a touch to try and see what tools are available and whether there's actually even appropriate methods to use them here in California. And so I wanted to determine, are there hotspot locations in California where there might be more common occurrences of shark bites? How well do the currently available methods actually work? And are they viable options, and should we start using them here in California? And so to start, I looked at distributions of recorded shark bites throughout California to see if we could see any noticeable trends through space or time. So using the data from the global shark attack file, I sorted through to verify the locations and whittled it down to all the California incidents that were unprovoked and verifiable. And I put this into ArcGIS and broke it down by decades and incident types so that I could look at population densities and look at the coastal spread of shark bites through here. And I wanted to see if I could pick out areas where things were occurring more frequently. So what you'll see in green are the coastal populations for coastal counties, which was kind of a rough proxy for beach attendance in those areas. The dots are the shark bite incidents. Red ones in particular are the fatal incidents that occurred. And then out here in the ocean is our density map, where you can kind of see it here. Where it's brighter will be a location where there's more frequency of incidents. And so as we go through, you can start to see trends over the coming decades. And certain locations of note started to stand out. You could see that up in Humboldt County, there was pretty frequent repetitive incidents over the decades, as well as a noticeable jump right here in the recent decade. But 2 particular areas of note stood out. The red triangle up in the San Francisco Bay area has been commonly cited in the media as a location where potentially 1/3 of all great white shark bites in the United States have occurred, and 11% of the global total. But what stood out to me was another area down in Southern California, which took up approximately the same area of space down here in the southern part of the Southern California Bight. And while there were not as many incidents total, within the last 2 decades, I saw that there were more incidents here than there were in that place the media frequently talks about and calls the Red Triangle. And so I wanted to go through and see whether these methods could be applicable here in Southern California in particular, since there's been ongoing interest here, and there was just last year nearly $4 million in federal or in state funding allocated for further research on this. So next I wanted to assess the non-lethal prevention tools that we have available currently. And it just started to show up to me how many of these actually exist. We have surveillance tools that are intended to monitor sharks to help activate early warning systems. There's drones, like we were looking at earlier, that can be outfitted with artificial intelligence to increase their ability to survey. There's sonar buoys, like the Clever buoy that was trialed off Newport Beach at the end of last year. Both of these I'll go into a little further in a minute. And then there's weather balloons that have been outfitted with cameras that they tested in Cape Cod, but were surprisingly expensive for the trials that they had. And there's different barriers. There's exclusion nets, barriers with magnets, electrical barriers, and these were pretty quick to rule out for California because they don't work very well in surf zones, which if anybody knows Southern California, we are known for our surf. And then there's all the personal deterrents. There's electrical ones, there's magnetic ones, there's chemical repellents made from dead shark pheromones, visual deterrents on wetsuits, visual deterrents on surfboards, even surf wax that can supposedly keep the sharks away. Many of these remain untested still and are based entirely on theory. And so I wanted to go through all the most practical devices that were available and sorted through to see which benefits they provided, their drawbacks, the costs, and potential environmental factors. And then I wanted to address the potential applications here in California. And so it made the most sense to start with tools that have already been implemented here. And so to start, I contacted lifeguards out in Seal Beach. Lifeguard Chief Joe Bailey informed me that this was the first location in California to start using drones for shark surveillance. And while they initially had some success and they could see sharks, they realized over time that it was not as effective as they had hoped. The water visibility did not offer them much chance to see things. Sharks were rarely seen to begin with, and they felt that it was going to give beachgoers a false sense of security. And so they actually discontinued using them. Newport Beach and some others still do use drones from time to time, typically to try and confirm when reports of sightings have already occurred. And then here in San Diego, we still don't even use drones with our lifeguards. The lifeguard chief stated that with a budget of less than $30 million and roughly 30 million visitors expected to the beach this year, their agency has approximately $1 to spend per beachgoer. And they felt that that's best spent on manpower rather than unverified technology. And considering that there were nearly 10,000 rescues in San Diego alone last year, with more expected on the way this year, that seemed like a more pressing issue than the handful of shark bites which may occur. The Clever buoy system, which was trialed off Newport last October, great fanfare. Mayor was present, state congresspeople were there. However, after the 3-month trial period began, there were no news stories or headlines touting its massive success. And so after some digging, I found that the system supposedly detected 60 sharks during its 100-day period. It alerted the lifeguards 40 times about potential warnings. But when the lifeguards sent out drones and jet skis to verify, there were 0 confirmed sightings. And beyond all that, these cost close to $500,000 per buoy. The same sum of money could cover the annual salaries for approximately 10 additional lifeguards. And similar tests out of Australia have had other issues as well, plagued with system outages and false detections. Warning for those of you squeamish, you might want to look away for a moment. So I wanted to look at personal deterrents to see whether those could offer an alternative. So let's look at the story of Zach Davis, a teenager in Florida who likes surfing. You can see here he was bitten on his right forearm. You can see on his left wrist the shark bands deterrent he had gotten for Christmas just 2 days before the incident. So while the company claims he may have landed on a shark provoking it to bite, he doesn't remember that to be the case. That seems highly questionable to me as well. So the reality is, while most of these companies have all sorts of research that they've conducted to verify their tools work, there's been almost no independent testing to prove this. The few independent tests that occurred have showed that electrical devices such as the shark shield may be the most effective, but even in those cases, it's only been a 60% reduction. So it's not a guarantee, and this could lead people to engage in riskier behavior or take fewer precautions. See, the flaw behind so many of these shark safety measures is in the belief that we can make the ocean a safe place to play. Healthy shark populations are a good thing, even if it means there might be some small risk to ourselves. And so I wanted to put up practical safety tips that could actually be used to help reduce your risk that don't require hundreds or thousands of dollars in investments. And so these include things as simple as avoiding river mouths or places where fresh and salt water mix. These are locations where activity can be higher and sharks are known to hunt more often. Avoiding areas where people are fishing. Fish could draw hungry predators. Don't go alone and stay near other people. You tend to be safer in a crowd. Choose beaches with lifeguards and first aid readily available. I'd like to point out that while shark bites have been on a steady increase over the decades, fatalities haven't. And this is likely due to better access to medical care and first aid available at the beaches. Heed warnings and advisories. There's been an increased push to have unified signage. Right now it's still fairly different beach to beach, but this is an example of what's used in Long Beach for different advisories, warnings, and beach closures. And then lastly, pay attention to other wildlife. Things like birds diving into the water where there might be bait fish present. This is what you see above the water. What you might not see is what's happening under the water with the other bait fish. And then one more warning for the squeamish in the crowd. Avoid areas with a high presence of shark snacks. Here in San Diego, we know we have a lot of these animals. In particular, pay attention to agitated behavior, but also, unfortunately, this poor fellow that I actually saw here in La Jolla just a couple weeks ago. See, we need to remember that the ocean is not a pool. This is a place of wilderness, no different from a rainforest or a savanna. And so while it's important for us to take precautions, we also need to remind ourselves that we assume some level of risk when we enter the water. But when it comes to sharks, that risk is so incredibly low. I'd like to remind you all that we're simply not on their menu. And so I just want to thank everybody who's helped, my advisors, Samantha, Alicia, and Andy. I had a whole lot of people who helped me out through the process. Carrie, thank you. And then just all of you, fellow cohort, and thank all of you guys for being here today. And I'm happy to take any questions. Hilly?
Nick, that was excellent. But I'm wondering, did you get any data on which sharks are primarily the main focus of attacks?
Here in California in particular?
Sure.
Since I was looking here in California, over 90% of shark bites are from great whites here in California. Occasionally there have been some mixed in where it'll be a blue shark or salmon shark, but the vast majority of them here tend to be white sharks. Gary? So I contacted the sonar company that manufactures their hardware, and I got some information out of him, but he said due to like client obligations, he couldn't divulge the accuracy of their system. But he did admit to me that detecting sharks is definitely lower in accuracy than anything else, and even like water conditions and weather can affect the accuracy of their system. But I couldn't get a hard number out of him.